I sat on the story I wrote for a week. I wasn't sure whether to post it or not after giving it more thought. Yesterday, I got a visit from someone I never thought I'd see again. I heard a knock on my apartment door and before me stood Lita. She didn't look like she'd aged a day since the last time I saw her. She looked like how she had when I first met her. Tan caramel skin, piercing hazel green eyes, a petite figure, 5'0", and jet black hair. The only difference was that her hair had grown down to her waist and was tied back in a messy braid. She looked up at me with that intense expression of hers before offering me an amused smile. "We need to talk," she said simply. Of course, I let her in. She just waltzed into my apartment like she owned the place and took a seat on my couch. "Nice place you got. A little plain, but you were always kind of a basic guy, huh?" She said casually as she surveyed my apartment while I stared at her in disbelief. Then she motioned for me to take a seat in the armchair across from her. In dumbfounded silence, I just did what she said. She's surprisingly good at getting others to follow her commands. That small figure just seems to exude authority when she wants it to. "Well, I did promise you I'd explain everything, and I'm finally here to uphold that promise. After I explain, I've got a favor to ask," she said. I just stared at her in response for a long moment before finally just spurting out a stuttered, "Okay." Lita laughed. "Always so good with words, huh, Jack?" she teased. "That's my name, by the way." Lita continued on to first tell me that her name isn't actually Lita. Navina is her name. So Lita, now Navina, continued on to explain just what happened in the forest that night, and just who she really is. According to Navina, she comes from a long line of monster hunters. What we encountered in the forest 5 years ago was a parasitic species that can take over organic creatures that are controlled by one hive mind, which in this case had taken the form of that coyote. They come from another world and showed up on Earth about 200 years ago. They're a species that tries to colonize worlds and consume whatever they get in contact with. But Navina's group has been able to keep them at bay. They've taken to calling the species webbers, since they trap their victims in that spider web-like substance, and the parasite looks somewhat like a spider when removed from the host. And yes, Navina and I agreed that the name wasn't the best, but it's what stuck. The webber is a much larger creature that separates itself into smaller creatures, which will then take over a host. They believe there are multiple webbers from whatever world it is they're coming from, but they don't know how many. They also don't actually know how the webbers get here. Thus far, there are 5 webbers who have attempted to invade Earth, and only one of them has made repeat attempts. There have been 15 invasion attempts in the last 200 years. Whether that means they killed the other webbers when they stopped them, they don't know. They just know this one particular webber they've taken to calling BAW for Big Asshole Webber is the one who keeps coming back. Navina says that her people need to start coming up with better names. The webbers will take one primary host body on Earth, and then extend their control outwards into other creatures by trapping them and feeding them its black blood so that the body becomes suitable for habitation. Then they will eventually turn into the warped creatures I saw 5 years ago. I angrily asked Navina why she didn't warn Hank and me about Abigail then, and she just sadly stated that she couldn't alert the webber that she was onto its game. She thought maybe there was still time to save Abigail since there have been cases where people in the process of becoming hosts have been able to be saved. She regretted what happened to Hank and that she couldn't save him. She explained that night was a train wreck and that she was supposed to have reinforcements come much earlier. But due to extenuating circumstances, they hadn't been able to arrive on time. Navina explained that her mother had been killed by the same Weber she fought that night. Then she proceeded to nonchalantly drop that she was able to fight BAW so efficiently because she's not human. No, in fact, she's a half-demon. She had to use a spell that suppressed her demonic abilities while she worked at the state park so BAW wouldn't detect her, and the effects of the spell had finally worn off when we were trapped in the cave system. She only laughed at my dumbstruck expression, shrugged, and said that her mom had weird and kind of shitty tastes since her dad had never really been around anyway. She had been raised mostly by her grandpa, who was in fact Briggs. Surprise, surprise. That's not his real name either. So the man, who was really named Brisgen, left weeks earlier to get enough reinforcements to come back and deal with BAW when the signs had started showing up that another invasion was coming. But, as you all already know, he didn't get back until everything had already gone to shit. If I ever see him again, he and I have some things to talk about. Navina explained to me that not only are there Webers, demons, and magic, apparently there's a good many things that are real, like vampires, werewolves, angels, fae, and dragons, among many other things. I'll really need to ask her more about that later. She sped over that whole point as she explained that her organization were people who kept the peace and stopped the bad guys who threatened the balance, as she calls it. Can't say their name, unfortunately. Top secret and all that. She tells me that her group in the organization is looking for new members. They need reinforcements since it's looking like that state park I've noticed may be the site of a new invasion. Well, I'll cut to the chase. I said yes. I've got an opportunity to do something against those bastards and do some good. So I'm going to take it. Navina's standing behind me right now while I write this. She's very amused by how I describe her. She's also told me to stop treating her like a kid since she's over 100 years old. That leaves me with a lot more questions I need to ask her later. But I've got a lot I'm still trying to process. So, one step at a time here. Agreeing to join this organization means that I'm leaving everything behind now. I don't like the idea of leaving my girlfriend behind. But I know she wouldn't understand all of this or why I feel I need to help Navina and her people. After I finish writing this, I'll be packing my things and making what preparations I need before I set out with Navina. My parting words to all of you are to be vigilant. There are many strange things in this world that we write off as nothing but fantasy. But what many of us forget is that there are many things we don't know about this world. Better to keep a watchful eye than be caught off guard if you do encounter something hidden from the majority of the world. With that, I thank you all for reading my story and I hope that you heed its warning. What happened in that park to the people like Hank and Abigail was a tragedy. Hopefully I can do something to now save people like them. Best regards and signing off. Jack. Perhaps I'll be making another report here one day, to warn you all of more of those strange things that exist in this world, so often unseen by the masses.